Good evening. June 18th today is of course the eve of June 19th, the day which we now know as Labor Day, which of course commemorates the June 19th, 1937 general strike. And so the movement for social justice greets the labor movement of Trinidad and Tobago and all working people, workers, the unemployed, because unemployed persons are workers too who have been denied the right to work, our farmers and fisher folk, the self-employed, on the occasion of Labor Day 2020, the 83rd anniversary of the glorious June 19th, 1937 revolution. There is no doubt in our minds that the 1937 general strike and anti-colonial revolt, and yes, it was a revolt against colonialism, and we are discussing a lot about colonialism these days, because the working people of the time had demands for self-government, for home rule, for independence. And so that revolt that began in Faizabad on June 19, 1937 was indeed a revolution. According to our own Tobagonian social historian, Dr. Susan Craig, and I'm quoting her, the workers struck a blow at property, thus striking toward the state and the whole structure of colonialism. And this political significance of the strikes was clear to the British authorities. And Arthur Lewis, who later on became a Nobel Prize winner in economics, Vice Chancellor of the University of the West Indies, St. Lucian, who was studying in England in the late 1930s, wrote this in an important paper called Labor in the West Indies. And he said, on the political front, nothing short of a revolution has occurred. Governments have already been forced to adopt all sorts of measures to meet the grievances of the workers, land settlement, fixing minimum wages, expenditure on public works and slum clearance, old age pensions, workmen's compensation. This is indeed a revolution, said Arthur Lewis. For hitherto, West Indian governments have not regarded measures of this sort as of primary importance. But even more important than all of this is the fact that the working classes have become organized politically and that their interests have been forced into the foreground. End of quote. Trinidad and Tobago has much to celebrate today on Labor Day, as there have been undoubtedly many tremendous gains won through the years of struggle by workers from 1937 to now. The 1937 revolution established trade unions, which, through collective bargaining, have set the foundation for ending the worst forms of worker exploitation. Many social improvements were put in motion in education, healthcare, housing, social security that have made the lives of ordinary people better. And many of you don't know, and therefore perhaps don't appreciate, that many of the things that we have today were really as a result of the June 19th, 1937 revolution and the struggles by working people to change their conditions of life. Going back to Arthur Lewis, he correctly believed, and I'm quoting him again, that the labor movement has already behind it a history of great achievement in a short space of time. Remember, he was writing this about a year and a half or 2 years after June 19th, 1937. And he goes on to say, it will make of the West Indies of the future a country where the common man may lead a cultured life in freedom and prosperity. And of course, when he said common man, he was talking about the ordinary men and women of the West Indies. And by cultured life, he was speaking about a life where people could not only have the basic needs of life, of a decent job, of an income, of being able to take care of their children, of providing for them shelter and food and nutrition and education and healthcare and all those basic needs, but also engage in their own personal development, artistically and spiritually, and in so many other aspects of human endeavor. Lewis then went on to make this very important point. Constitutional reform, which will enable it to get the labor movement, to get into power, is the first aim of the labor movement. And I want us to remember that. Constitutional reform, which will enable it to get into power, is the first aim of the labor movement. So the labor movement always had, from the 1930s, the objective of getting into political power. Now, we want constitutional reform, yes. So in 1946 in Trinidad and Tobago, we had formal political democracy, the right to vote. Every person over the age of 21 in 1946 had the right to vote. And in 1962, colonialism ended with our becoming an independent nation. So we could elect our own nationals into the highest offices of the land. But the truth is that these and other constitutional reforms have not enabled labor to get into power. The closest that labor has come to getting into power was way back in the 1950 elections, when the British Empire Citizens and Home Rule Party, the party of the hero of the 1937 revolution, Tubal Uriah Butler, won more seats than any other party. But Butler was denied the office of chief minister. Remember, we were a colony then, so he would not have been prime minister, but chief minister, which was then the highest elected political office in the land. And he was denied that position by a coalition of the governor's nominees, because our parliament was not like what we have today with a House of Representatives and a Senate. We had a single chamber where the nominated persons were nominated by the governor. And so the governor's nominees, who were persons who represented the elites in the society, who saw eye to eye with the governor, they joined up with the other elected persons in the Legislative Council, the persons who were not Butlerites, and they denied together Butler being the chief minister. So that was the closest that Labour came to getting into power. Apart from that, for a very brief period in 1976, with the original United Labour Front formed by the trade unions, the Oilfields Workers Trade Union, the All Trinidad Sugar Estates and Factory Workers Trade Union, the Island-wide Cane Farmers Trade Union, and the Transport and Industrial Workers Union. Those unions formed the United Labour Front as a political party in 1976. And that party won 10 seats in the parliament and became the official opposition. That was the second closest that persons in labor came to being in power in this country. Since then, however, workers, since 1976, workers have voted for the two traditional parties, the PNM and of course the DLP/UNC over the years. As a result of this reality, the objectives of the June 19, 1937 revolution have not been achieved. Labour has not been in power. Those parties who have been in government have promised a whole lot. But remember, a promise is a comfort to a fool. And so they have delivered little or nothing to working people. And the proof of the pudding, as they say, is in the eating. There's been no progressive labor legislation reform. Almost 20% of the people of this country live below the poverty line. They just don't have enough money to put food on the table for their children and provide all the other things that a family needs. The majority of workers in this country live from payday to payday. We knew that, but many didn't and only found that out in the pandemic. Those technocrats and bureaucrats and those who in control of this country only found out that most people live from payday to payday when people had to stay at home because of COVID. But we've been saying that for a long time. And hundreds of thousands of workers earn barely enough to survive. Our fight to provide food for the nation. And the COVID-19 pandemic showed us all in this country who the really essential workers are. Our healthcare workers, our teachers, our workers in electricity and water and on the port, and our workers who are at the airport, our customs and so on, workers, our workers in sanitation and in the whole area of the environment and waste management and so on. Those are our really essential workers, workers in the banks and in our supermarkets and groceries. They are our essential workers. But you know, we have not treated them as if they are essential. All that we did for them, perhaps, was to give them a clap in recognition for the services to us all. But the employers did not treat them as essential. Another reality, workers in their thousands have been sent on the breadline in the last 5 years. And in the last few months, thousands of workers have lost their jobs and have not got back employment after the reopening of the economy post the pandemic. And of course, we have a contract system which denies workers, and especially our young people, job security. So our young workers out of school, out of university and so on, get a 3 months, a 6 months, a 1 year contract. And what can they do with that? They have no job security, and so they cannot get a loan, far less to buy a home, and therefore they do not have a future. They can't see themselves having a future because they just don't have any security. You know, it is said that to continue to do the same thing over and over, expecting a different result, is a sure sign of madness. Political madness is to expect something different from those parties that have been in government. People, however, want real change, which is why at almost every election since 1976, going back more than 30 years, the party in government has been changed almost every election. But in truth, all that has happened is that we have gotten exchange. Vote out one, bring in another, no real change, only exchange. So how do we get real change? We in the MSJ are saying on this Labor Day 2020, the anniversary of the 1937 revolution, we are saying that we need another revolution. But this one has to be a revolution of the mind. The revolution of the mind that will enable us to complete the objectives of the June 19th, 1937 revolution. I went back the other day to our New Year's message, the MSJ's New Year's message for 2020. And in that New Year's message, written just 6.5 months ago, this is what we said, and I'm quoting: "We need to get out of the political corner into which we have been boxed, or which we have boxed ourselves into, the mental slavery of believing that the only possible outcomes of the 2020 elections is that we stay PNM or we revert to the UNC, as this will solve nothing and push us further into being a failed state. The MSJ challenges our fellow citizens," this is what we said in our New Year's message, "to think out of the box, to have a revolution of the mind. As Angela Davis, that outstanding African-American radical woman activist said," and I'm quoting Angela Davis, "you have to act as if it were possible to transform the world. You have to do it all the time. Optimism is a political act." End of quote. Our New Year's message continued. "The new hope that we have for our nation," this was our optimism, "is that the majority of citizens really do want to bring about real change." That was a clear message that we have been hearing from so many of you during the past year, 2019. People are saying, "We are fed up, we need change." Aren't you saying that? We are fed up, we need change. And we said, the MSJ therefore dares you to take that step forward, for you have the power to make the change. We can together disrupt the status quo of these two parties that are taking us nowhere. And so we ended our message, our New Year's message. Let us make 2020 the year of the revolution of the mind. That was our New Year's message. Yes, we declared, the MSJ declared, 2020 to be the year for the revolution of the mind. And how correct we were, for indeed 2020 has witnessed a revolution of the mind. Now, none of us could have predicted exactly how it would have unfolded. We could have predicted the events of the first 6 months of this, the third decade of the 21st century. We didn't know there would be a global pandemic called COVID-19 that has caused and is still causing major changes throughout the world. So much so that even this year's June 19th celebrations have to be fundamentally different. This Labor Day, no mass demonstrations, no mass rallies, and so on, no huge gathering of workers going down to Faizabad, to Charlie King Junction, and so on, to engage in solidarity. And then came the Black Lives Matter protests, following the murder by police officers of just one man, George Floyd. Look what a rebellion that one murder has sparked, not just in the United States, but in so many countries of the world, their mass protests. It has also forced us here in Trinidad and Tobago to examine many inconvenient truths about our society, about race and color, about class, about discrimination and injustice, as well as the need to challenge and change the history that was written by those who colonized, enslaved, and oppressed us. The revolution of the mind is today underway in many aspects of life. But you know, the most important revolution of the mind for the people of Trinidad and Tobago, and especially for the youth, because it was young people in 1937 who made 1937 so powerful. There's young people who are protesting all over the world in the Black Lives Matter rebellions and so on. So especially our youth and working people, because it was workers who were, of course, in the forefront of 1937. The most important revolution in mind for the people of Trinidad and Tobago, and especially for the youth and working people, is to break the only two parties, ethnic voting political culture. That is what we have to break. That revolution of mind must get us to think that we don't have to have only two parties voting along ethnic lines. In June 1937, the workers challenged the colonial status quo. They were colonial system. They organized the working people of 1937, as Arthur Lewis has told us. They organized politically, and as a result, they forced their interest into the foreground. They moved from out of the shadows, where their interests and their needs and their aspirations were being ignored and denied by the system. And they challenged that system, and they forced their interests into the foreground. Today, 83 years later, we once again must challenge the existing status quo, the system that causes so much injustice, discrimination, bad criminal justice system, a system where people don't have any say in decisions that are made about their lives, when labor is being marginalized, where workers are being sent home, where people are living in poverty, where people are unemployed. So many wrongs that take place in this country. We must challenge that status quo. The people's interests, your interests, can indeed be forced into the foreground and become reality. But for this to happen, you have to organize politically. That's the lesson of 1937, June 19th. You have to organize politically. That's how change was made. That's how the revolution took place in 1937. You have to organize politically. Today we believe that the MSJ offers you that possibility in 2020 to organize politically, because we are a political party that represents your interests, the interests of working people, the poor, the youth, the marginalized, the women, the elderly, the self-employed, the small business people, and so on, our farmers, our fisher folk. We represent your interests. We have a track record of struggling with you and fighting with you and working with you to bring about justice. So we invite you on this eve of Labor Day 2020 to rally with the movement for social justice. Support the movement for social justice, the MSJ. And yes, elect us into the Parliament of Trinidad and Tobago, just as the workers elected their chief servant, Tubal Uriah Butler, in 1950 into the then Parliament, the Legislative Council. This time, however, with the MSJ in Parliament, having some strategic seats in that Parliament, we can force your interests as a people into the foreground and make sure that your interests, your needs, your aspirations are realized and become a reality. So we say, in the spirit of Tubal Uriah Butler, be bold, be revolutionary. Let us have a revolution of the mind so that those who labor can hold the reins of power. Thank you very much. Have a very good evening. God bless, and have a wonderful June 19th Labor Day 2020.